Hi guys, welcome back to another video here in the channel. Today we're going to be talking about a very specific and important thing. This is something that everyone should be doing. If you are a 3D artist and you're not doing this, which I'm about to show you, you are missing out on like a bunch of important things for your portfolio and for anything that you do, for your products, for your presentation, for your clients, freelance, whatever it is. And that, my friends, is, and hear me really clearly, post-production. Okay? Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that I'm not a post-production master, but I do know the basic things that you can do on your stuff to just make it look a little bit better. This is going to make it so that more people see your stuff, more people find your stuff interesting, and this opens more opportunities for you. Because as you might have noticed by now, presentation is, I would say, almost half the battle. You might have amazing models, amazing textures, amazing animations even, but if the presentation is lacking, we immediately see it. And we see this all the time when we go to the movies or we're watching a series and something just doesn't look right. It's usually not the acting, it's usually not the writing even. Sometimes it's just the presentation, the way the stuff is presented to us. So this right here is a project I did literally 10 years ago. It was called Abandoned or Doctor's Appointment or something like that, I called it. It's supposed to be like an abandoned hospital or something. And it was my texturing and shading like class exercise. So one of the pieces that we did for that class. I'm still quite proud of what I did. Of course, now I see a lot of things that I would definitely change. I would add more stuff. It looks a little bit empty. But even though it looks, a little bit weird, we can still make this thing look even better by giving it a little bit of post-production. So the first thing about post-production is that you need to have some reference. In the same way as how when we are modeling or sculpting, we go for reference, we do the same thing with cinematography. So a lot of horror films, for instance, go for this sort of like bluish cold temperature on the way they portray things. I'm actually really like, when I went to see it on the movies, it was actually one of the first dates I had with my wife, and now wife, and it was, I was like surprised by seeing the cinematography of this film. It was just freaking amazing, and it was scary as well. But there's a bunch of other films. There's one that I really recommend. It's called Haunting Hill House, something like that. If you haven't seen this series, this one's on Netflix. It's really good, like really good. I really liked it personally, and the cinematography is also really good. So one thing that I noticed from horror films is that they never really go with pure blacks on their scene. Like even this one right here or this one right here. Yes, we have very dark tones. Most of the stuff is on the dark sort of like level, but they never really go to completely dark colors. And I feel like this one is already failing there because, as you can see, if we double click this one, let me just create a copy. I'm going to double click or just alt and drag. There we go. I'm going to block one. I always block one and hide it so that I can compare. But if we sample the colors on this one, you're going to see that this is pretty much pure black. So that's hurting us. That's really like making it a little bit difficult for us to get something, because once you go either completely to the dark colors or completely to the white colors, you no longer have any sort of like room or wiggle room to change. That's why when they take photographs and films, they do this in something called raw space or raw color space, where things look very washed out, but it's very easy to then bring in the color and bring in the contrast back in any post-production software. So here, we're going to start with the basic one that I like to do, which is a curves. I'm going to just go over here to an adjustment layer. It's on the bottom right corner. I'm going to add a curves node. Now, it's very important that you guys learn how to read this like technical stuff right here. This is called a histogram, and it represents where all of your pixels are based on your image. So this is telling me that most of my pixels are in this range of dark colors inside of my image. If I were to push this thing in a different direction, I can switch how the values of these pixels are represented. So I'm going to do the first thing. I'm going to grab this little graph node. I'm going to push it up. So now I'm telling, hey, all of these guys right here that are very dark, I want to lighten them up. I'm going to bring them up a little bit so that they're not as like dark, right? Now, probably not that much. Something like this should be more than enough. And now you can see that we're actually recovering some information that was lost on those like very intense shadows that we have on this render. Actually, I think this render, I did it in something like B-Ray or Mental Ray back in the day. Now, another cool thing that you can do here, very common, is we can also bring the whites down. You can see, for instance, there's a very intense highlight there on the windows. So I'm going to bring this down, and that's going to tone down that sort of effect right there. Okay? Now I'm just gonna click 3 times, one here, and one here. These are my dark values, mid values, and high values, or low values. And what I can do here is I can push them a little bit darker if I want to, but this is not only gonna push the dark colors down, it's gonna push all of the colors down a little bit, or I can push them up and they're gonna lose a little bit of that contrast. I wanna add a little bit of contrast right there. The highlights, I usually like to push them up, but in this particular case, I'm actually going to push them down. So you can see, for instance, here on the lamp, if I push the highlights down, we're getting rid of a little bit of that sort of like glossiness to the whole thing. And this is why post-production is very important, because imagine if our client goes and says, hey, I really like the 3D model, I really like the render, but the gloss or the highlights are too intense. You don't want to go back and re-render everything. If you have properly calibrated your renders and if you do render passes and things like that, it's very easy to tweak these things in post-production and make sure that they fit specifically what you're going for. So I'm gonna push my values right there. Now, here's another cool thing. We can actually go to each individual curve of the element. So we can go to the blue colors and say, hey, we want things to be a little bit more blue. So let's push the blue curve up just a tad bit right there. And maybe we want the shadows to be a little bit cooler and maybe the highlights not as cool. So we can play with this as well. We can play on how much blue value we want on our stuff. We can do the same, for instance, on the green value. Let's push the green value up a little bit there, down a little bit here, down a little bit here, and you can see how we're changing the color balance of our element. This is not really color grading. I don't want anyone in the comments saying, oh, this dude doesn't know how to color grade. No, I don't know how to color grade. I'm just showing you how you can modify some of these values to generate something that looks a little bit more interesting, okay? And in this case, I'm gonna go to the red values, and I just wanna take the reds out of the shadows as well. So I'm gonna do something like that. There we go. So now, if we take a look, let's close this for just a second. You can double click to bring them back, or just like get this in there. Oh, come on, there we go. Now if we take a look, I'm gonna press Alt and click on this little intersection between the layers so that these curves only affect the original layer or the copy layer. And that way, if I check the old one, this is how the picture used to look. So not bad, right? But again, this one is definitely bringing, you know, a little bit of a different effect. You might be familiar with this type of effects thanks to Instagram, because Instagram does this automatically by going through the filters. This is what it does. It goes through all of the different parameters of your colors, your lights, your highlights, your shadows, and it modifies them slightly to get something that looks, well, a little bit more interesting. Now, the cool thing here is you can actually stack them. So let's call this curves. I'm going to call this my color correction, right? I'm just going to do a little bit of color correction right there. And then I'm going to add a new layer, another levels layer. Again, I'm going to press Alt and click so that it only affects this stack of elements. And the levels are a little bit different than the curves, because instead of having a curve, we have this, again, another type of histogram that represents where our stuff is. And what I can do here is, again, I can push these values to give myself a little bit more contrast in certain areas. This, for instance, gives us a lot of contrast, very crunchy. I don't want that, but I do want to have my elements or my lights a little bit harsher, like something like that. Maybe a little bit more highlight there. Something like that. Cool. Now, one of the amazing things about post-production, and again, you can do this in pretty much every software, is that you can play with masks. By default, this blending modes, or adjustment layers, have the option to mask out certain things or use opacity. So for instance, I can minimize the effect, let's say just like a 30% of that sort of like dark effect that I want to add right there. And I could also use a brush in this case with black. Oh. Why is it not letting me? Is it doing it? I'm just gonna... I want to flip this. Okay, when that happens. So, let's go B. What? It's expecting a freaking numeric value somewhere. What did I change? Okay, there we go. So now I'm gonna fill everything with black, and what I can do is change this with white and add a little bit of that sort of like vignette effect only on the borders of my image, only on the corners of the image. And that can really help give me a sort of like different effect there, sort of like a vignette, but it's not really a vignette because it's not affecting everything uniformly. It's only affecting what we're changing here with the levels. Now, I'm going to show you another trick. This is a very cool one, very cool thing that Photoshop has. If you find an image that you really like, and it's like, you know what, I really like, I don't know, this sort of like colors that we have on this scene right here, or like this sort of colors. I think this one I like a little bit better. I'm going to copy this image. And if I paste this here inside of Photoshop, I can use this image to influence the values and the colors of my object. And I'm going to bring this all the way down. I'm going to select this image. Let me turn off my filters for now. And if we go to layer, image, adjustments, and then match color, we can select our composition right here and select the layer called, in this case, it's called layer 1, which is the original one. And look at that. It grabs the colors and it sort of like tweaks and modifies the values of our object so that it matches a little bit better. Now, of course, here you definitely want to tweak things up. For instance, I'm going to use a little bit of fade to get rid of some of that effect. We can change the color intensity and stuff like that. But it gives us something that looks way closer to the original sort of like filmography or cinematography effect that we're going for. So I'm going to hit OK. Remember, this is a final change, so we're definitely seeing the change right here. But that doesn't mean that we can't add all of these things back. Now, for instance, here on the color correction, I definitely see that we might want to push some of the highlights back in, because this definitely got a little bit too desaturated. So let's play a little bit here with the effects. It's getting a little bit there. This one's definitely too intense. I do like the vignette. You know what? Like, maybe this color correction is no longer working, so I'm just going to delete it. And I'm going to add another curves. And let's do it again. I'm going to push this up. There we go. So I'm going to push the center up now. I'm going to push the shadows down a little bit. Of course, this black color, I'm going to push it up so it's not like pure black there. Same for pure whites. And then we can desaturate or twist the whites right there. Look at that. So now we're getting this very interesting effect, right? Where from this, we're going to this. And that's, again, the sort of like the strength of all of these things that we're doing, the strength of post-production. The fact that we can change things around and find a specific thing that we might like. Now, if things are getting too dark, another adjustment layer that you can use is an exposure. Exposure, literally, as the name implies, similar to how we do it with lamps, we can push the exposure up so that we get a little bit more light in the scene. But I do like playing a little bit with the offset sometimes to remove a little bit of that effect. Like, we don't want too much because then it starts looking a little bit overexposed, right? So it's all a balancing act. And when you're doing this for a client, for production, as a freelancer, whatever, you might want to, of course, ask around and just ask them and make sure that you're doing things the right way. Now, let's add a couple of extra effects that we can add to this scene so that we can, give it a little bit more light. And one of them is God rays, right? God rays are always a very cool thing. I'm going to use my lasso tool right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this sort of like light blue color. You can actually sample it from like the cabinet right there. And then with the lasso tool, I'm going to lasso out this sort of like cone coming from the window. So right around there. And we're going to fill that new layer with this cone. Now, what we can do here is we can do a filter, blur, and we can do a motion blur. So as you can see, it blurs in the direction of the window. Get some like interesting hazing effects right there. There we go. And if we set this to something like an overlay, for instance, soft light, even hard light looks interesting. We are going to get a little bit of that sort of like fog effect on the element. But here's where the important part comes into play. I'm going to add a mask. I'm going to add a brush. And we need to like hide a couple of these things. So for instance, here, I'm definitely going to get rid of some of this stuff hitting on this area. Maybe here on the window as well. There we go. And for instance, it doesn't make sense that this inner part of the element is getting that sort of like foggy effect. So I'm going to mask out. Again, I'm going to erase. I'm using a mask to erase this out from the lamp. That way, it really looks like this foggy effect is going behind the lamp. Same for the chair. Like, it doesn't really make sense that we have this sort of like side of the chair being hit by that effect. So all of this side right here, we can delete it, right? All of this area right here, the bottom part. This is very, very important. Yes, you can do fog in the, what's the word? You can do fog in the render engine, right? Like, you can add effects or atmospheres and things like that. But it's expensive. It's one of those things that definitely takes a toll on your render times. And especially if you're doing something like a steel, like here, it's a good way to sort of like get away with this sort of like effect. Now, the cool thing about using a mask is that we can again, decide where and where we don't want this sort of stuff. I'm going to soften this up a little bit more here. So I don't want to have too much right here. And another thing we can do, for instance, get rid of that, is we can add some like lines. So again, by using our brush, we can hide. And maybe there's like something out there, right? That's making it so that the God rays are not hitting everything. I actually think it was looking quite fine here. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna like decrease the intensity of the element, and I think it's a little bit too saturated. So I'm gonna press Control U to go into saturation and hue, and I'm gonna desaturate this a little bit more. But you can see how that little small detail there can really, again, help tell a different story to a horror piece. And that's one of the things that we always want to look for when we're doing this sort of process of trying to find how to tell a better story. Let's go for something a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to go for, let's say, demonic patterns like graffiti. And we should find like things like this, right? I'm trying to find something that's not super like just laid out like this, like an element. Let's call this like just graffiti patterns ritual. Let's see if we find something. Now that's, yeah, something like this. That looks very, very cool. Let's use this one, and let's see if we can find another one. So we can bring this in, and since most of the colors for this thing are white, one of the things that we can do is we can set this to a multiply. And as you can see there, multiply removes most of the colors. Control L then allows us to go into our levels, and we can play with the levels to really push the white color out by changing the contrast right there. There we go. And that's it. Just delete the little borders right there. A little bit of opacity there to sort of like blend it in with the rest of the element. And that looks interesting, right? Like that's an interesting thing that we can use. This one's actually quite nice. I like it because it has a lot of stuff in it. So let's copy this. Let's hide that one for just a second, because with this one I can show you something interesting here. So we're gonna get this in there, and then again, same stuff. We're gonna set this to multiply. Of course, we're probably gonna have to like scale this up. There we go. And we're gonna erase, of course, all of the things that we're not supposed to see on certain areas. Like this one's right there. There we go. And very important, we also want to delete the ones we're gonna mask out, or kind of like mask out the chair, because otherwise this flattens the image. It looks like this thing is on top of the chair, and of course that's not what we want. Especially on things like this. This is what they call going sort of like pixel perfect and making sure that everything that you're doing looks good on all of the levels. Same for like this machine right here. It might be easy to just like remove some of the graffitis in here. But having a little bit of overlap, like this one's right here going behind the wall, I think it really helps sell the sort of like the effect. Usually for this kind of stuff, you're going to get masks. You can render passes out with masks of the different objects to make this a little bit easier. Right now I'm doing this like very, very fast and dirty. There we go. And again, make sure that it makes sense to the scene. So if we have some tiles missing from that part, that probably means that the graffiti there is also going to be lost, right? So this is how we tell a story, and every single detail that we're working with needs to be taken into account. All of those things, all of those things. And it takes time. But again, this is very important. And again, I really appreciate it if you guys are watching all the way to this point, because not everyone watches like a full 20-minute or 30-minute video, but you guys are learning the important stuff. If you've already spent 10 hours, 20 hours, 40 hours, 50 hours, 100 hours working on something, right? Anything. It could be a, what's the word? It could be a character, a vehicle, whatever. Then spending just a little bit extra time here to just like do the final like steps that you need to really make your scene look more complete. It's a no-brainer, right? Like if I tell you, hey, if you spend 2 more hours working on your scene, it's gonna look 10 times better. Wouldn't you do it? You would, right? And this is why, again, it's important to learn this kind of elements. Now, let me grab this image. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to bring it up here, right around here. And we can press Control T and use something called perspective to push this into perspective. Like this. There's other ways to do it. Again, I don't do a lot of post-production. But there we go. As you can see, this one matches our perspective at least roughly, right? And now we have graffiti also on this wall right here, which it makes it seem more integrated with the whole scene. So let me grab all of this, guys, so that you can see. Control G. We don't need that one anymore. And look at this. This was, again, my original render from Maya with some interesting textures and models. And this is how we can change it to really bring it sort of like to the next step. I'm going to show you one more stuff. Well, actually, a couple more. The first of them is a little bit of lens dirt. This is not something that you add all the time, but in this particular one, I think it can help. I think it might look like interesting. And if you look for this sort of like lens flare textures, you might find one like this one right here that actually follows the sort of like same direction that we have on the light. Because if we place this right here, there we go. And we, of course, oh, sorry. If we grab this one, we make it bigger and we flip it, right? And we have it here on the window. It sort of like matches the composition of the whole thing. And again, we set this to, in this case, it's a screen or lighten. Any of this one. So I'm going to go lighten. And I'm going to push the values again so that we get rid of all of the black colors. And what we can do is, of course, just lower the opacity quite a bit. We just want to have a little bit of detail here. I might even go in and blur this a little bit with Gaussian blur. Not too much, but just so that a little bit of those sort of like dust particles get lost in the scene. And even though it might not seem like much, those sort of like details can really add to the sort of way that you're interpreting a scene or seeing the scene as a whole. The last one that I'm gonna do, and this is just a sort of like personal preference of mine, is I like to add the little bit of a box letter on the bottom side. It kind of like makes it look like widescreen. So just adding these bars here on the top and up the bottom. I don't know. To me, it always makes them feel a little bit more cinematic, right? You don't necessarily need this. Again, this is one of the things that I personally like doing, and I feel like it really helps with the whole thing. So that's it, guys. This is how you can use post-production to take a piece that was, let's say, already a good piece, relatively good, at least for old Abe 10 years ago. It was like, yeah, you did a good job, and take it into something that looks way more interesting. Now, you might, of course, have your opinion about the color choices that I made, whether too much graffiti was good or not. All of those things are perfectly valid. That's the part where the artistic sort of like interpretation comes into place. But I just want to show you guys how it is possible to spend a little bit of time. We just spent 20 minutes right here, and I've already took a render that they did 10 years ago, and I made it way better. I can re-upload this on my portfolio or update the portfolio with this new like wireframe or rendition right here, and it's gonna show that I know how to present something in a way better light. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for watching this. I hope you liked it, and I hope this was helpful for you. And if it was, then make sure to leave a like, share, subscribe. If you want to support us, you can check our full courses. On most of the courses, I talk about things like this, on how to present your stuff in the best possible way so that you get the best chances when you're building your portfolio. So that's it, my friends. Thank you very much. I'll see you back on the next one.